Welcome. So assuming you're not living under a rock, you're likely aware that there's a dungeon farming meta going on right now. Protection Paladins are the best tanks for this because not only can we generate threat from a distance with Consecrate and buffing, but we can also deal a lot of damage while doing it. As an intro to this series, I'll be covering Deadmines, Stockades, and Gnomeregan. Let's get started. So while Paladins are the shit, one of the things that you can't escape is that you need a mage for this to really work out. You can see here I just have a priest and a hunter with me, and it's really kind of just me doing all the AoE damage. You gotta have at least someone that does AoE damage, but a mage in particular will offer you slows that are gonna help you kite more. Now in Deadmines, you're mostly looking at packs of miners, which are non-elites, so not an amazing AoE farm to begin with. For the level, it's a nice change from questing. One of the downsides to coming in here over leveled like I am is that you essentially have to stand on top of the mobs in order to really pull them, because body pulling just does not work. I'm also not the cleanest puller in the world. You can see I'm getting hit in the back and stuff, but at this level it doesn't really matter too much. It's all more about taking damage, or I'm sorry, dealing damage. The main reason for this is at this level a shield is essentially just armor. You're not really blocking a lot, even with redoubt. It's just not that common. You can see I even use a two-hander sometimes when I'm just smacking stuff. It doesn't really matter too much. Pretty much it's all about dealing damage right now. Quicker mobs die, less damage you take, quicker you get through the dungeon, you move on with your life. It's beautiful. So two cool things about Deadmines. The first is that Miner Johnson seems to have a pretty good spawn rate, so getting his shield early on might help you out. The second is actually on these goblins here, where you see they use the Melt Ore ability, and I eat one here, but as soon as I use Blessing of Freedom, the debuff is gone, and I'm immune to the next cast. So definitely take full advantage of that in this room. Now, while the miners offer really good AoE in here, once you start getting to the elite packs, you're not really able to pull as much as you normally could. You have to be pretty over leveled, and if I had two mages here, maybe I could pull a lot more. But you see, I'm pretty much sticking to about 4 or 5 at a time maximum. In the room before this with the goblins, you really only pull like 1 or 2 of those at a time, because they either summon pets, they hit you with melt, which while you can negate with Blessing of Freedom, it's still kind of annoying. And basically all the elites in here are annoying in their own little way, except for the pirates. They're pretty straightforward. You know, some of them are a bit ranged mobby, so you got to get near them and then kite them back over into the melee, but it's not that big a deal. Even then, you're not going to try and pull the whole ship unless you're crazy. You have to have a pretty good coordinated group for that. In a lot of cases, when you come in here, you're definitely not my level. I'm way over leveled right now. And you're not usually that geared, and you don't have a lot of skills to work with either. So it's just not fantastic for AoE early on. Stockades gets a little better, so let's jump into there. So let's start Stockades with what I would consider to be a really bad pull. Ideally, you want to commit to pulling 1 or 2 rooms at a time up front. Fully commit to pulling that whole room. The last thing you want to do in any AoE situation is add new mobs to the pack past the halfway point of the original mob's health. You'll see that I do that here, and it just really stretches the pull out. It stretches everyone's mana out, and it's just no good. You're likely to be looking at about 2 rooms at a time when running this dungeon, especially if you're pulling it by yourself. Now let's say you have a couple mages with you and they're cheeky and they're good at going forward, going to the other rooms and wanding. Maybe you can work more into the pull. There is a lot of room to kite in this instance, just in a straight line back. It's not too bad, but usually these mobs hit pretty hard and they do a lot of stuff. You just don't want to mess around with like your healer getting kicked, you getting disarmed left and right, getting stunned in the middle of a group of mobs. There is a lot of risk involved. Usually 2 rooms is probably the safe bet here. Not a whole lot else to talk about with this instance, as it's basically the same thing over and over and over and over again. You're just going to take your time and methodically pull these rooms, and that's about it. Now around level 30 is where AoE pulling starts to get more reliable with dungeons like Gnomer and SMGY. I actually skipped Graveyard myself, so we won't go over that in this video. We'll just focus on Gnomer for right now. At the start here, you're going to have a lot of trogs to work with, and whether or not you decide to take the jump run is going to determine if you want to even bother farming these. A lot of the times it's common to come in here around 30 or 32 like I am, and basically these are green mobs, so do you really want to even bother? I personally like to. I prefer to go sort of that almost full clearish route if I can, whenever possible in any dungeon. And because these are the easiest mobs in the dungeon, it is pretty straightforward to pull a lot of them. You can see I'm actually using a two-hander for most of that pull, and I'm kind of just taxing my healer. But as we get deeper into the dungeon, we're going to start having more interesting pulls to work with. This is probably one of my favorite ones, where you can pull 3 of these packs at a time. Now, if you don't have a grenade, you could use an item called Torch of Holy Flame, which is an offhand weapon that is obtained during a quest line where you kill a level 32 elite called Morbent Fell. This is part of your Duskwood chain. A lot of people will skip this because it's a very long chain, but this item is deceptively OP. You might look at this debuff and not think much of it, but it turns out that it actually has a 30-yard range, and being on a 1-minute cooldown is essentially insane. It's basically like having grenades for pulling, but without all the money you have to spend. The only downside of this item is that it does take 30 seconds to charge up like any other on-use effect when you equip it, so you really have to plan ahead. As far as the rest of Gnomeregan goes, there's not a whole lot of AoE pulls you can do from here on, because once you get to these elites, it starts to really slow things down. They don't quite drop as fast as the earlier mobs, and most of the mechanical mobs tend to have abilities that you really don't want to deal with. You know, these chicken mobs are some of the easier ones, but the ones that cast, frost and fire abilities are pretty rough. And then once you get towards the last hallway where the boss is, you really aren't pulling any more than one pack at a time. I mean, you can see here I'm actually taking the time out of my day to type to my group and tell them exactly what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it, because there's just no room to get willy-nilly anymore. Now, maybe not every group requires this level of coordination in order to deal with these particular mobs, but I find that you really don't want to mess around with them because the bombs can really throw people off if you're not good at destroying them yourself. And generally, you see the AoE damage here is just not great, and I'm taking quite a bit of damage. I mean, they're hitting hard. This AoE is not dropping them. There's a reason I marked Skull and X specifically to kill them faster, but here we are just, blizzarding for no reason, basically. Overall, this hallway is just a pain in the ass, to be straight up with you. Especially the arcane nullifiers, as they're going to essentially make the mobs immune to spell damage. You can see yet again, I'm just rambling and this pull is still going on. We haven't even pulled the sheep yet. Anyway, that's going to be all for now. I'll get into SM in my next video, and that's where we're going to really start doing a lot of kiting. As I progress through this series, you will notice more and more and more kiting, because right now I can get away with just kind of smacking mobs at this level, but once you get higher up, the mobs start hitting harder, they have more abilities, and you're going to have to deal with it. But in the meantime, have a good one.